Good afternoon. This is Ben Davidson of the Suspicious Observers, and I've got sitting on the couch next to me Adrian from SuspectSky. How are you, buddy?
Hey there, I'm doing well. Good to
For,
see you.
for those who don't know, Adrian and I grew up together, uh, best friends for, well, we're closer to 2 decades than 1 decade, actually.
It's weird.
But yeah, and it's weird that we've both got these YouTube channels where we're exploring the stuff that's a little outside the mainstream lexicon, so to speak.
hmm
But I'm glad we have a chance to talk about aliens today. Extraterrestrials, life, outside.
One of my favorite topics.
Yeah, I think we can tell. Um, let's start with something you mentioned right before we actually got on the call: the different types of evidence that there are. And I don't know. I don't know if you want to just repeat what you were saying, because I thought that was
Sure.
good for everybody to hear.
Sure, yeah. I think it's a neat way to frame the subject matter too. But there's about like three general categories I would say that you could have evidence of extraterrestrial life. And this is in terms of it being here, like visitation. There's a lot of scientific evidence that you can use to extrapolate. Is there bacteria in a fossil from Mars? That sort of thing. Is there a transmission that you receive that repeats itself? So I'll leave that out of the equation. This would be for visitation extraterrestrial, and that would break into pretty much footage, photographs, stuff like that. Investigative reports. This could be current, but also historical archive. Project Blue Book, for instance, would be a good example of that, and eyewitness testimony. And I think there are pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses to all three of them, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Photographs might be the best evidence. It would give you the most definitive look at what a visitation craft might appear like. But as everybody knows, with technology today, you can fake a lot of photographs and a lot of and footage and whatnot. And there are some really good ways at telling when footage has been faked. Image analysis, air analysis, these can all be used to verify validity. But those are time consuming, and you don't always have that opportunity to do it, and it's not definitive. Investigative reports are a very strong piece of evidence in that they combine many types of sources of evidence into a summary and a decision.
What would be a good example of an investigative report?
Sure. There's lots of MUFON reports out there where they go and they'll talk to witnesses independently, and maybe they'll say the same story and they never had any contact with each other. That's a very strong form of almost like cross-examination, I guess you could call it. Or they will recover a fragment of debris from somewhere. There's a French case where an eyewitness, claimed that something from the sky landed and then took back off, and he had a photograph of the imprints where it had landed, and then they also found, some carbon debris from presumably, some type of exhaust, and I think they also found some metal fragments too that they couldn't identify. There was something strange about the metal. It was not indigenous of the region, or it was very difficult to get, or I couldn't remember the exact details, but it was neat because you had three pieces of evidence that all supported that something strange had happened, that a visitation had occurred. And it was nice to be able to look in that archive and see the work that somebody else had done and piecing that together.
Yeah, I find that those are often the most fun because, not to put the evidence in a negative light, but it's more circumstantial than direct, and it allows your imagination and your creative thinking to say, okay, well, what could this have been? When you have a photo or a video, you're pretty much presented with the story, and then you have to make the judgment of, did somebody fake this? If you make the judgment that no, they didn't, okay, is this a legit extraterrestrial, or is this our government with some secret technology?
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea where you have, okay, you just had the imprints, you have what this guy can tell you, you have some little bits of evidence, and then the rest you have to put together in your head. Might not always end up with the best result, but that's probably the most fun for me.
Yeah, it's kind of like a like a case in court, and here's all this evidence. Here's how all this evidence what it could mean. It could be, like you said, it could be actual visitation, it could be government plane, it could be natural phenomena, and then you have to use that evidence to come to your conclusion. And that also, people always talk about proof. Is this proof? Is this great video, or this great photograph, or this great case? Is it proof? You didn't prove to me that it was an alien visitor, so it's not. And as we learned in law school, it's not. There really isn't any truth. It's always, is it more probable than not that what you think is actually what happened? And there's those different standards of review. If for civil case, you don't have to prove it as good as you would have to in a criminal case, because the stakes are so much higher. And I think that's interesting. How much evidence does a particular case of potential visitation require before you can say something strange happened? I think a visitation occurred. Is it beyond a reasonable doubt? Is it the highest standard, or is it something less? It's more likely than not that a visitation occurred, that a UFO, a genuine alien vehicle, was seen by an astronaut on the moon, when the astronaut testifies to that fact and they have a photo of it, and it can't be a government plane because they're in space. So there are those situations that have high credibility, and you really have to question, is the explanation that it was not a visitation, is that less likely to be the truth than a visitation having occurred?
What situations like that I think are really convincing? The ones where, first of all, I'm glad you mentioned the astronauts, because it's not just when they were on the moon, like when they're in the flight, especially some of the earlier ones. I think they've done a pretty good job with protocols and procedures. Like, we don't get to hear any of this stuff anymore.
Absolutely.
But on some of the things the other astronauts said, it's not even like NASA or the government has come out and said, oh, no, what they saw was this, or this was this. They just deny that the conversation even took place, or something like that.
Or they just ignore it, and people
make up their own mind.
Yeah. A great source of information for astronaut testimony is in those public archives, the transcripts of the early missions. And they will say, astronauts on Gemini programs and stuff will say they see really weird lights following them and all this crazy stuff. And that has just been forgotten. It's just been so long that people just don't really pay attention to it anymore. And it's not like, hey, NASA, explain to me the Gemini testimony. And, they'll just send you a letter. It's been a while. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's probably nobody at NASA now who was even a part of that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one of those forgotten pieces of evidence it's right there in the public eye. In videos I've done where Apollo astronauts will describe seeing very strange things like campfires on the moon, and talking about visitors and things like that are flying around their spaceships. You might get an astronaut in an interview to talk about it, but you never get any sort of public mention from NASA, any sort of like official response to it.
Yeah, well, I know you and I both are of the opinion that, one, there is not just life outside of this planet, but there's probably what most people would consider intelligent life outside this planet. And we're both on the same page in that we believe they have been here and are probably still around in some capacity, whether that's every UFO sighting, whether it's 9-to-1 government technology, there's still that one, and it's a visitation. So wherever it is on that, I think we're both on the same page there. Why are they here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that we had private discussions about how we both do not think it's related to resources,
right,
or water, and your work in Star Water for sure adds a lot of credibility to that conclusion that we both have.
Yeah, after the Starwater series, it wasn't my intention at all, but I was pretty much convinced that there's no way they'd be coming here for our water. I mean, one, you had mentioned during that previous conversation that if the civilization is advanced enough, they can probably separate elements and create their own resources. But if they were only, say, 100 or 200 years ahead of us, then maybe they'd be looking for resources. But when there's literally water around every star, in every cosmic jet, when there's moons of Jupiter and Saturn that are literally just balls of ice, they are 99 to 100% water. There's just no reason they'd ever come here to steal our resources, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's a good exercise in efficiency too. Is it more cost effective to just go and mine an asteroid to get everything we need, or is it, rather than coming to a populated planet and fighting,
Yeah.
the inhabitants for those resources? And because if, like as you said, 100, 200 years more advanced than us, so yeah, they might need resources. If they're only that much more advanced than us, it's not the situation where a billion-year-old alien civilization comes to the Earth and it's just we're screwed. It's a civilization 100 years ahead of us might actually not have as easy a time conquering the planet as the billion-year-old one would. So they might think twice about coming here and trying to take our resources. They must just go and mine the moon for whatever they need.
Yeah. Do you think that they're sort of malicious towards human interests, or do you think that they're probably here in somewhat of a friendlier or neutral capacity?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I think my personal beliefs is that the ones that are here are the super advanced ones, are the ones that are the billion-year-old civilization that can bend time and space at will, and have no need for our resources, have no need for anything like that, but that they are just interested in us as a people, perhaps culturally, perhaps physically. We had a lot of discussions about how in alien civilizations, society might be a hive mind, might be a collective structure like an ant colony, where there's a single leader, and then worker drones, that kind of a society. And if that was the case, then they would be very interested in us because of our individual nature, and they might want to learn about us. And to do that, they might abduct people. They might observe us at a distance, to learn about what makes an individual society function. And, this has actually gotten a lot of attention from a couple authors recently. But I think that anything that they would be here, any reason they would be here would be a research or kind of an investigative, goal. But that being said, then it's kind of like, well, is it benevolent or malicious? And that's kind of difficult to answer because, when humans test lab animals, is that malicious, or is that just kind of a reckless disregard or like an indifference to how you're treating those subjects? And perhaps that could be considered a malicious because if you don't care the effect that you have on those subjects, maybe that's not a very benevolent attitude to have.
Yeah. And no matter what, if you're the one who gets abducted, it's not a good situation. But if, for example, the nursery hypothesis is closer to the truth, then maybe, maybe they can't just snap their fingers and know everything about how to guide our civilization along to actually get to the point where we're more than just this wasteful, selfish, greedy species. They might have to, I don't know if this is the right word to say, but they might have to sacrifice the lives and happiness of a few people to abduct to learn more about us to do that. For those who don't know what the nursery hypothesis is, basically they either found us as a very young planet and a young species, or they helped move our DNA along to get to where we are now. And they're just sort of sitting there kind of in the shadows, but guiding us when they have to, maybe even altering natural events, natural disasters, things like that. It's your imagination could really run wild there. But if that was the kind of case, and the idea is, hey, look, the purpose of all of this is life, creating life, progressing life, and coming together with other life, then it would need to have some sort of nursery aspect to it. But he'd also probably need to abduct people to learn how to do it properly.
I like that you brought up the nursery hypothesis because in many ways that might be the most likely scenario that's occurring. And I think the strongest evidence for that is, science says alien life is very likely. It's a huge universe. There's lots of resources, et cetera. It's been around for so long. There's likely many, many, many species out there, and many of them have probably advanced to a point where they could travel far distances or manipulate space-time in ways to move themselves very far away and to explore the galaxy. And then you have to ask yourself, why do we not see them then? Why do we not pick up their transmissions? Why do we not see the craft? Why are we not contacted by them? And an answer to that might be the nursery hypothesis, that to help us, evolve and grow as a species, they on purpose shield their presence from us because that's the only way that they could help us.
Learn on your own, make your own mistakes, kind of thing.
Yeah, and that sort of that prime directive from Star Trek kind of attitude might explain why we don't see them when science says that it should be so common to see them.
Another explanation for that might be the jungle idea. You want to explain that?
Yeah, the jungle's a neat idea too. I forget who came up with it, but the jungle hypothesis is that space is so vast that even with billions of species and trillions of life forms, they just might not run into each other that often. And I think the analogy is if you're looking for an anthill in the jungle, how likely are you going to find it when the jungle is 1 million square, miles in size? It's just, you can wander around the jungle for decades and maybe not find an anthill. And so maybe just Earth is in a relatively uninteresting part of the galaxy, and there's just not a lot of traffic around here. And, maybe they just haven't gotten here yet, and maybe they never will. But what's neat about that too is if that is the situation, if space is just so vast that it's very unlikely for them to run into each other, eventually transmissions will reach one another. So that's just kind of a waiting game. There's that bubble of TV and radio signals that's just expanding outward, and eventually they're going to cross, with another civilization's transmissions. And that's kind of a neat point too, because it's like, what if they don't use TV and radio? What if they use something totally different? And that's why it's so difficult to speculate. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, because everything that we know of when it comes to that stuff all deals with electromagnetic radiation. Maybe they're dealing with quantum entanglement, where one thing here has instantaneous effects over here, and
just like technologies might have evolved on their planet in such a different way than it did here, we wouldn't even recognize that it was something from an intelligent, civilization. Like dark matter, for instance, that we see dark matter everywhere. And I know there's like some controversy about dark matter.
Yeah, but I mean, what are we supposed to do? Explain the entire controversy over dark matter every time we talk about it? For the time being, we'll just call it dark matter and realize that there's probably electrical explanations.
Yeah, but this dark matter is this thing that we say we see everywhere and we can't explain it. What if that is what civilizations elsewhere are using as their source of power? And maybe we do see signs of civilization all around us, but we just don't recognize it because it's so alien. But we just don't understand it.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who actually have been suggesting that the sun has some form of consciousness because of how it seems to fire on the backside, and it fires off the incoming and outgoing limb 5 to 10 times more than it fires at Earth, and that just follows the Earth in orbit around the sun year after year.
It's very interesting.
Kind of like it doesn't want to sneeze in our face. Yeah. It knows we're weak.
Or the benevolent presence is assisting with that. So the benevolent hypothesis definitely has a lot of credibility to it from just the lack of contact, I think. But that being said too, I mean, the malicious hypothesis could also be very true in that it suits their purposes that they don't know or that we don't know that they're around. And with their technology and their sophistication, they would be able to hide their presence.
That's a good point. And something else just popped in my head. What's that called? It might just be called the observer effect, which would be really apt. What's it called when, like, by just studying something, you affect the outcome?
Yeah, that's
It's not the observer effect.
I think
It's something like that, though.
I think it could be called that. That's there was that double slit experiment.
Yeah, yeah. And so the idea would be that if their goal is research, and it's sort of like a neutral thing, like
Hmm.
it's not malicious, they're not trying to nurse us along, they're just trying to learn. Maybe they understand that, hey, if we do too much, we're going to affect that. And specifically, the thing they could do the most that would affect their test results would be let us know they're there
Yeah,
because of
absolutely.
our society culturally. There's something interesting that happened on Fly on the Wall this past weekend. We were talking about panspermia because there's this university in England called the University of Buckingham, and they claim to have found evidence of panspermia. They found these tiny little titanium spheres, and this organic ooze comes out of them. Now, we were talking, yeah, we were talking on Fly on the Wall about how maybe there's terrestrial explanations for how
Hmm.
these things could have come up, but and that's a conversation where we could talk all day and never get to an answer. But where the conversation went was there's this article posted by a website called End of the American Dream, and it was focused on this research from the university, and they were saying that they were taking the stance of, oh, are they trying to put this idea in our heads that life on Earth was created by aliens, and why would they be trying to do that?
As opposed to religion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what it spawned in my head was another idea, not the question of are we being prepared for something. The question is, are we actually prepared to hear some of these truths? I mean, because,
Mm.
yeah, true enough that the Pope and members of the Vatican have claimed that they are open to extraterrestrials being there and that they think they probably exist. But there's this fabric of religion, and there are people who don't listen to the Vatican and the Pope who are Christian. And then, I mean, what does this do to almost every religion except maybe Hinduism? Because Hinduism talks about all these different gods and everything like
Yeah.
that.
I always felt that it was, I feel that the presence of extraterrestrial life is absolutely fine for religion to absorb that fact. I don't think that it changes. If you believe in a Christian God, a benevolent Christian God, I don't think that the presence of extraterrestrial life would negate your belief in that existence of a God or your religion or anything like that. And I know some people do, and I honestly don't understand why.
It's because you'd be amazed at how strong the fundamentalism movement is. Because we are supposedly the chosen, people. This is the chosen planet. God created us. We are the center of everything. Even the notion that that the Earth goes around the sun is harmful to their paradigm. There's a bunch of people who come out and say, no, 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 no. The book says this. Earth is the center of everything, and everything goes around us. That idea actually is still out there, and people are proponents of it. It's not well thought of by the mainstream, but those who are into it are really into it, and they're passionate about it. Um,
Because to me, it's almost like if panspermia was true, if ancient alien civilizations sent out nano robots to every corner of the galaxy, and these nano robots were somehow involved with bringing organic components to planets. And so, yes, let's just assume for the moment that Earth was, or life on Earth was created by ancient alien civilizations. To me, that fact, doesn't negate the possibility of higher power or,
Right.
it's God could still
Have created
exist.
them.
Yeah. Or just created the universe and then turned the key on and then just said, let's see what happens.
And one thing that's definitely for sure, yeah, we could see the argument for, oh, well, this conflicts with some of the wording in the religion. There's definitely nothing about the existence or the visitation of an extraterrestrial that should say, that should make you say, oh, I guess I got to throw the 10 commandments out the window, or the 7 deadly sins are no longer deadly sins, like, are these people just going to start murdering and stealing?
Right.
And, I mean, this has an effect, but it shouldn't. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
it won't. It shouldn't have that much of an effect on how people live their daily lives. But at the end of the day, there's also this, for all the harm that certain religions have done, and there's really no religion that is immune to having done harm in the past, having killed people in the name of God in a way that we now consider to be somewhat barbaric and unnecessary. But still, how do I want to put this? Every religion has this sort of way of keeping people on a line and focused. Because when you think about it, if we just had these big questions in our head all the time, like, oh my God, there's all this life out there, and what happens when I die, and where'd I come from, and where's our purpose? When we're presented with alien life, all of a sudden, all these things in our daily lives, going to sit in the cubicle,
Yeah.
peck away at a keyboard, going and listening to people bitch at you because you're answering phone calls, or going and serving somebody their GMO nonsense. Where's your motivation to do that when you know that this amazingness is out there? You kind of reflect back on humanity and just see us spinning our wheels here, just kind of stagnated, and it's like, wow, there is so much we could be doing. Why in the world are we doing this? Why are we doing what we're doing? It's almost like I mean, and I don't think this would happen to everybody, but a lot of people would feel that way. It would almost be like a big half of society could shut down. Forget the religious thing, but like they might just think, what's the point?
Yeah, it'd be very, very disruptive, and that could definitely be a motivation for governments to hide evidence of alien life. I know that I would take a couple weeks after disclosure was announced to just reflect and think about it and learn more about it. And I wouldn't be going to my office for the trucks would stop running for a little while.
I have to say, I would still probably do the morning news.
Yeah. Well, there'd be a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there would be a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I see the disruptive element to it, and something you said about the chosen people, and this just kind of occurred to me. It might be that people have been interpreting that part of religion incorrectly, and that maybe the chosen people is just sentient life generally, and not any specific race or caste of it. And I just think that's a neat way that maybe people should think about it.
Yeah, the idea of creation and then fostering your creation. Take a look at what a human is. A human can create things with their hands. They can create ideas with their words, and if you get two humans together, they can create life, as long as you got a guy and a girl. And look at some of the things we create. The cities that we've created, when seen from space, look like nerve cells connecting to one another. It's this scalability of the universe that perhaps this is the point for us to, be doing what the Creator did in our own way. Assuming there is such a thing as a creator.
And panspermia, I mean, would just be another step on the ladder. We may never be able to say who made the first step on that ladder, who created the first race, or created the universe to get everything in motion. But, it definitely, I don't think, would be mutually exclusive to, be created by another race, but then who created that race at an infinite, forever.
Yeah. Just like you look at every last piece of evidence for evolution and for creation, there are some conflicts. I think that, you can't deny that evolution is a real thing happening on this planet. We see it. Look at your thumb. Look at the albino creatures in caves. If you haven't looked up that one, that's a fascinating story. But at the same time, there's no way evolution makes the human brain grow 3 times its normal size in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen without some kind of influence. So, interesting stuff.
I also think something that would be very, very, very interesting to talk about and think about and reflect on is the role of religion in potential alien societies. We tend to have this view that aliens would be extremely scientific, very logical, rational entities because their technology, we would assume, would require that sort of a mindset. But maybe they have religions of their own that they prescribe to, and how would their belief in perhaps multiple creators conflict with beliefs on Earth with a single creator? And I just think that would be, or maybe they don't even worship creation. Maybe they worship something totally different. I don't know. It's just a neat idea to think about missionaries from alien civilizations, someday in the future coming here and trying to explain to us, their beliefs. And perhaps, maybe if the, not panspermia, but the early contact theories, helping human civilization, maybe a lot of those religious beliefs came from them, where the Aztecs and the Mayans and whatever, they believed in multiple gods. Each god had different roles. Maybe that did come from these early visitors. And then now we don't follow that. How, for the most part, the majority of the world's religions are single gods.
Are monotheistic.
Mm-hmm. And what if they come back and they're pissed that we kind of traded all their gods for one god? I don't know. It's just kind of a neat mind, experiment.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah. That actually might be that could be an entire day's discussion right there on what that could be.
Yeah, and it especially because the early civilizations, they were isolated from one another, but they all had very similar belief structures, and that lends a lot of credibility to the idea that there was visitations going on back then. And then now just to recognize that we've abandoned a lot of those practices, we're more industrious, less balanced with nature, maybe that is something that the path we weren't supposed to take,
Yeah. And if you combine we actually call these cultural archetypes. Well, that's when unconnected civilizations in history share an agreement about something that is so in detail that you say, okay, this is not a coincidence, and they weren't connected and communicating, so how did they both know the same thing? You take that and you combine it with the fact that a lot of Mayan knowledge was lost when we destroyed the temples. Whoever raided the library at Alexandria did not burn all the books. They took some. And, all that stuff like that, it's the kind of thing that initially hits you as, you want to be pissed off about it. And then, I always end up coming back to, okay, well, think about the people who are fundamentalist in religion, or maybe they're not religious and they'll say, well, what's the point of going to work? Or maybe because of fear of an invasion, they just kind of bunker down. And there's all these different things that could basically shut society down that would end up costing millions of humans' lives just in the chaos. And, basically what I know about mass psychology, I would not want to be the one to have to make that choice, because the moment I was given the power, if I was told, okay, today you have the power, you get to decide when disclosure is, I would start running for the podium, and then as I got close, I'd be like, wait a minute. Am I making a huge mistake? Am I about to kill the entire world?
Yeah, wait a second.
Wait a minute. But anyway, that could be another thought for another day.